Welcome to my channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe. She lived in a wheelchair for 10 years, until a human being healed her legs. Azara had become something of a legend in the glass-domed capital of New Lixir, though not in the way she liked. For a decade now, her name had been whispered with the reverence reserved for fallen icons and tragic nobility. An aerial scout of the Varellan Armada, grounded by a failed jump warp, her legs paralyzed by a cascade of cosmic nerve collapse. Her enemies called it a cautionary tale. Her allies called it fate. Azara herself called it intergalactic nonsense, usually while trying to bypass her wheelchair's maximum speed limiter just to annoy the palace guards. She wheeled through the royal wing with a grace born of sheer irritation, her silver hair flowing behind her like a comet's tail. She'd long ago stopped listening to the courtiers and therapists, with their theories about psychocelestial trauma and spine resonance dissonance. Most of them spoke in the kind of pseudo-spiritual scientific jargon that made her ears twitch, and her ears were longer than most. The latest recommendation involved chanting near a lava lamp and something about moonstone compression socks. She had just parked herself under the atrium of thoughtful silence, a ludicrously large glass room full of white noise generators and uncomfortable chairs, when he arrived. Tall, pale, frizzy-haired, and surrounded by the scent of strong coffee and mild explosions, Elias Moreau made his entrance like a man who had mistaken the grand hallway for a snack lounge. His lab coat flared behind him in a way that suggested it was either sentient or rebelling. "Are you Azara?" he asked, squinting at a data pad that appeared to be upside down. She raised an eyebrow. "If I say no, will you leave?" "Nope. Already signed the forms. Also, I brought pastries." He held out a bag with a proud grin, as if presenting a holy relic. It was immediately suspicious. "Are those from Earth?" she asked, peering in. "I've heard stories." "Only partially weaponized. They're called cinnamon rolls. They're sweet, sticky, and will clog your arteries in 7 different dimensions." She snatched one anyway. "I'm not here to waste your time," he said, plopping into the nearest chair and immediately knocking over a holographic sculpture of Varellan brain waves. "I specialize in biomagnetic resonance realignment. Basically, I rewire people with broken wiring." "That sounds wildly unregulated." "Oh, it is. But don't worry, I've only accidentally turned someone's foot into a teleporter once." Azara bit into the cinnamon roll and chewed thoughtfully. "Why do they always send the weird ones?" "Because the normal ones said your condition was incurable. I, however, am neither normal nor especially good at taking no for an answer. Also, I have a theory." "Of course you do." He tapped the side of his head. "Varellan neurology isn't strictly biological. Your people's nervous systems hum, literally hum, at a frequency almost identical to the emotional field of human alpha waves. I believe I can nudge your broken pathways with a bit of calibrated feedback." She stared at him. "You're going to hum at my legs." "Not me. The machine. Well, mostly the machine. I might have to sing a little." "You're insane." "Yes, but charmingly so. May I?" Without waiting for permission, he opened a compact case full of devices that looked suspiciously like earth hairdryers attached to musical instruments. Azara considered fleeing, but her chair was blocked by a decorative fountain full of bioluminescent fish, and she wasn't going to humiliate herself by crashing into ceremonial carp. He hovered a device over her left thigh and flipped a switch. A low, rhythmic thrum filled the room. She flinched. "Did that hurt?" "No, but it tickled the inside of my teeth." "Promising." He adjusted the dial and accidentally vaporized a nearby ficus. Azara blinked at the smoldering pot. "That plant owed me money," Elias said solemnly. "You're going to be my demise. Only if I'm bad at this." Another thrum, this time warmer, deeper. Azara closed her eyes. There was a pulse, faint but undeniable, somewhere beneath the silence of her legs. She'd grown used to the deadness, like wearing boots filled with static. But now there was not pain exactly, but tension, like a wire straining to reconnect. She opened one eye. "You're not just faking this for the pastries, are you?" "I have no idea how to fake anything involving alien neuroelectricity. I'm winging it at a highly professional level." He grinned, and she had the sudden, unpleasant realization that she didn't entirely hate him. The session lasted an hour and left her with a throbbing sense of wrongness in her limbs. But wrongness was better than nothing. She hadn't felt anything in years. After he packed up his toy box and obliterated another potted plant, he offered her a data pad. Document your sensations, even if it's just tingles or felt like a dozen bees humming show tunes. That's specific. It happened once. Don't ask. He paused in the doorway, giving her a curious look. You know, you're not what I expected. Let me guess. You expected a fragile, broken noblewoman with tragic eyes. No, I expected someone who'd yell at me until I cried. You haven't even threatened my spleen. Give it time. He waved and vanished in a swirl of coat and awkwardness. Azara stared after him, chewing the last bite of cinnamon roll and trying not to admit that the buzzing in her legs hadn't stopped. That night, the ache deepened. It wasn't sharp, but constant, a restless whisper beneath her skin. She shifted in her sleep. In the early hours, she dreamed of standing, not flying, not leaping, just standing, feet planted on solid ground, the world balanced beneath her. She woke up with a jolt, the muscles in her calves twitching involuntarily. She gasped, then laughed. Her legs were spasming, uncontrolled, awkward, beautiful. By morning, the wheelchair's voice assistant had to remind her 3 times not to try and walk alone. She ignored it. It rammed her gently into the wall in protest. She sent Elias a message. Legs buzzed. Chair angry. Plant ghost may be haunting me. When's the next session? His reply came back instantly. Tomorrow. Bring more ficuses. Azara laughed. Out loud. And for the first time in 10 years, it didn't echo inside a hollow space. Azara had never truly appreciated how many muscles were involved in standing until each one of them began complaining like disgruntled diplomats. Her second session with Elias began with him excitedly dropping a schematic on her lap, a hand-drawn diagram featuring stick figure legs, several arrows, and a rather smug-looking lightning bolt labeled Hope. She studied it in silence. You drew this? She asked. Of course, he said proudly. I was going to animate it, but my last attempt at a hologram led to the accidental awakening of a kitchen appliance cult. She handed the pad back and flexed her toes. Just don't point anything at the furniture today. No promises. The chair looks at me funny. He had installed a new device onto the humming unit, a swirling gyroscopic ring that spun at improbable angles. He called it the Neuroharmonic Stabilization Module. Azara suspected it was made of recycled drone parts and wishful thinking. Still, when he powered it up and aimed it at her knees, her spine lit up like a quantum chandelier. The room flickered, not visually, existentially. Azara blinked. For a moment, she could hear her blood humming like a distant engine. Her legs felt heavy, not dead. Real. Anchored. She gripped the sides of her chair. That was interesting. Elias adjusted the dial. Good interesting. Debatable interesting. I aim to confuse and cure. He handed her a biosensor band, which she reluctantly strapped around her wrist. It beat twice, and then began flashing symbols that looked suspiciously like a smiley face experiencing nausea. Ignore that. It's still learning your baseline. Is its baseline nausea? Depends on the patient. By the end of the hour, her calves were burning and her thighs trembled like they'd been woken from a century-long nap. Elias called it neurological sunburn, which she felt was an unhelpful metaphor, but possibly accurate. After the session, they relocated to the garden atrium, which Elias insisted was necessary for recovery vibes. Azara suspected he just liked the garden because it had a snack bar. He brought 2 cups of senchai, one of which he immediately spilled on his own sleeve. Important scientific note, he said, dabbing at the stain with what might have been a filter cloth. Chai is not a good conductor. Neither are you, she said, sipping her own drink. They watched as a flock of holographic birds passed overhead, programmed to mimic real avians that had gone extinct on 4 different planets. Elias tilted his head. I tried installing these on my ship once. The birds ended up with a screaming peacock loop that triggered every time the bathroom door opened. Azara snorted. You've traveled a lot. she said after a pause. I've run from at least 5 interplanetary licensing boards, if that's what you mean. I meant across space. He nodded, more serious now. Earth's still catching up in most ways, but we've got ideas. Some of them even work. When I heard about your condition, I knew it wasn't impossible. Just improbable. And I like improbable. She stared at her legs. They were covered in a soft biosynthetic wrap, designed to monitor nerve activity. Occasionally, the surface glowed faintly, responding to movement attempts. She tried wiggling her foot again. It twitched. Twice. Not graceful. Not impressive. But real. It's strange, she said. I spent so long pretending I didn't care. And now that there's a chance, I'm terrified. Welcome to the healing process, Elias said. Side effects may include emotional vulnerability, existential musings, and increased desire for pastries. Are you always this glib? Only when I care. They sat in silence. The birds passed again, slightly out of sync with their usual formation. One glitched and flew backward into a hedge. Elias eventually stood. Same time tomorrow. Azara nodded. Bring diagrams that don't smile at me. No promises. They're very supportive. He left, and she stayed. Her fingers hovered over the control pad of her chair. Then, slowly, carefully, she disabled the autolock and tried shifting her weight forward. Her legs resisted, groaned, and then barely held. She stood, wobbling, unsteady, hands gripping the back of the chair like it was the only solid thing in the universe. She stayed upright for 7 seconds before collapsing back into the seat, laughing breathlessly. The chair, which had been silently judging her for years, said nothing, which was progress. Later that night, she recorded a message for Elias. Today, I stood for the first time in a decade. Briefly. Fell over. Laughed so hard I scared the assistant drone. It's floating near the ceiling now. Please advise. The reply came almost instantly. Send photo of drone. Also you stood? You magnificent nerve conductor. She smiled at the screen, then glanced at her legs again. They were still hers. She hadn't realized how much she missed them until they started listening again. The following days blurred together in a mess of awkward sessions, dietary experiments. Chili powder is not a muscle relaxant, Elias declared after an unfortunate smoothie incident, and enough energy surges to warrant a palace memo on emergency recharging protocols. With each session, control returned in strange, halting ways. She could curl her toes, then point them. Her knees bent with a tremble that felt like a toddler learning to walk. She took her first step with Elias hovering close, looking equally proud and terrified. She immediately walked into a decorative column. Graceful, he said. I was aiming for it. I'm sure the column's honored. Every step after that came easier. The palace staff began treating her differently. Not like the broken relic she had been, but like someone reassembling herself, piece by determined piece. There were murmurs. Some skeptical. Others inspired. Azara ignored them all. She was too busy learning how to fall again. How to get back up. How to use legs that shook and stumbled, but carried her anyway. Elias continued being the chaos in her controlled world, tinkering, adjusting, occasionally setting things on fire in the name of science. He hummed as he worked, sometimes Earth songs, sometimes alien melodies she'd never heard. Once he brought a strange, spherical musical device that played what he described as jazz, but for molecules. She had no idea what that meant, but the music helped. So did he. One evening, after a particularly successful session involving stairs and only one crash, they sat watching the twin moons rise over the palace. Elias leaned back, arms behind his head. You know, in another universe, we'd be wildly famous by now. We still might be. The Virulent tabloids have been circling. I hope they get my good side. Azara nudged his foot with hers. Do you have one? No. But I hear lighting helps. The moons climbed higher, and for the first time in years, Azara didn't feel grounded in a cage. She felt grounded in her body. It was terrifying and wonderful. Azara's gait had progressed from baby space deer on roller skates to something closer to mildly confident parade float operator with questionable balance. Elias, in his typical, overly enthusiastic way, declared this a tremendous biomechanical victory, while simultaneously tripping over his own shoe and dropping a magnetic scalpel on his toe. Azara offered him a round of sarcastic applause, which he accepted with a dramatic bow and the phrase, "Pain builds character and slightly better reflexes." Their latest session had ended early due to a slight mishap involving a resonance loop, a miscalibrated core stabilizer, and a peanut. Elias insisted the peanut wasn't part of the experiment and had just arrived cosmically. Azara, mid-stretch, had laughed so hard she'd nearly pulled a muscle. "You know you're halfway to functional legs," he said, reattaching a fried coil. "That means it's time to push boundaries." "Great," she said, sipping her electrolyte gel through a straw shaped like a flute. "You mean stairs, don't you?" "No. Worse. Social exposure." She squinted. "You want me to go outside? I want you to attend an event, specifically the Interplanetary Rehabilitation Science Gala." "That sounds like a conference where people in lab coats drone on about cartilage elasticity and dietary foam." "Correct. But also, it's being hosted in orbit, and there will be dancing. I haven't walked 10 steps without looking like I'm dodging imaginary bees. You want me to dance?" "Azara, please. Everyone knows the best dances are just confident stumbles set to rhythm." She considered this. "Are there snacks?" "There are at least 3 edible items. Maybe more if you don't ask too many questions." She agreed under the condition that she got to wear her combat exoheels. Elias protested for exactly 30 seconds until she pointed out that the event's gravity could be adjusted, and she'd rather fall stylishly than wear orthopedic flats. 2 days later, they arrived at the orbital venue, a translucent sphere floating serenely above Lixer's equator, rotating just slowly enough to offer a view of the planet's 3 rings. Inside, 0-point gravity stabilizers ensured guests could drink, dance, and mingle without floating into the overhead lighting. Elias, wearing a slightly rumpled suit that may have once been fashionable on Earth, beamed as they entered. Azara walked in under her own power, leaning slightly on a cane that doubled as a taser, an invention Elias swore was purely defensive, though she suspected it also had Bluetooth. Her entrance did not go unnoticed. Diplomats from half a dozen systems turned to stare. There were whispers, some shocked, others celebratory. A few older Varellans even wept dramatically into their monocles. Azara rolled her eyes and waved sarcastically at one particularly weepy admiral. Elias guided her through the crowd with all the grace of a man trying not to step on anyone's tentacles. At one point, a Martian rehabilitation director introduced herself and asked Elias if he could help her cousin sentient moss regain its bounce. Elias promised to email some spores. They eventually found themselves near the dance floor, an energy field that reacted to movement with shimmering waves of light. Azara watched as 2 humans attempted a waltz and ended up drifting sideways into a buffet table. No one seemed to mind. "Okay," Elias said. "You ready? For public humiliation?" "Always." She stepped onto the field, gripping his shoulder for balance. The floor rippled beneath them, reflecting each step with glowing trails. Elias moved carefully, hands firm but light, guiding her in a slow rotation. She focused on his eyes rather than her feet. They were warm, infuriating, predictably amused. "I thought you said you couldn't dance." "I lied, but only to surprise you." "I'm surprised you haven't stepped on me yet." "I'm saving that for dramatic effect." They moved slowly, cautiously, a whirl of silver light and suppressed laughter. Azara's legs trembled, but they held. Her nerves burned, but the pain had faded into something familiar, like the ache after flight, not the dread of stillness. "You're glowing," Elias said. She looked down. Her leg wraps had lit up, responding to the strain and motion, casting a soft gold glow. "Better than sweating," she replied. They danced until the field dimmed, and the music shifted to something slow and choral, clearly meant to clear the floor. Azara collapsed into a nearby floating bench and caught her breath. Elias plopped down beside her, unbuttoning his collar with a gasp. "That went well," he said. "I didn't fall. You also didn't set anything on fire. That's personal growth." She leaned back, her head against the curve of the dome. Stars swirled above them, exaggerated by the projection system. I used to think the only way I mattered was when I was flying, she said softly. You still fly. Just differently now. She didn't answer. Instead, she reached over and poked the side of his head. You've got a signal light blinking. He blinked. What? Oh, that's the brainwave monitor. You're wearing a brainwave monitor? Standard at events like this. Helps track neurosocial engagement. She narrowed her eyes. Is that even legal? Questionable. But hey, turns out your presence makes my cortex light up like a party cruiser. I'm not flattered. You're blushing. That's core temperature regulation. Don't flatter yourself. They were interrupted by a virulent official who wanted a word about collaboration opportunities. Elias was whisked away before he could offer resistance. Azara watched him go, then stood, unsteady, but confident enough to reach for a refill at the snack bar. She walked the floor again on her own. No one stopped her. A few saluted. A few just stared. She was fine with that. Later, Elias returned, slightly breathless and holding a clipboard. I may have just agreed to a symposium. Possibly two. Also, I think someone challenged me to a duel. I leave you alone for 10 minutes. You underestimate my networking skills. She laughed. You're impossible. Correct, but I'm also the guy who got you to dance. She didn't argue. They left the event with a handful of new invitations, a questionable jar of interstellar hummus, and the promise of more sessions. Her recovery was far from over. Her steps still wobbled. Her muscles still burned. But now, she had more than progress. She had motion, rhythm, momentum, and Elias, who, despite all logic and regulation, had managed to pull her into orbit again. Azara had officially graduated from physical therapy to what Elias called free-form kinetic living, which apparently meant walking places without constant supervision and occasionally kicking a ball made of compressed nanofoam across the palace courtyard. She scored twice before accidentally punting the ball into the Royal Koi reactor, which overloaded the decorative lighting and sent a wave of rainbow light cascading through the diplomatic wing. Elias declared it a minor setback in the name of movement. He had started showing up at odd hours, often with new devices, charts, or smoothies that had questionable coloration and the consistency of industrial glue. One of them glowed. Azara refused to drink it. He insisted it was high in neurophilic enzymes. She suggested he try it first. He did. Immediately sneezed glitter. The smoothie was banned. That morning, he barged into her quarters with a portable hologram projector and an expression of dangerous excitement. Good news, he said, tripping slightly on the rug. We've been invited. To what? Another gala? Last time I ended up explaining nerve regrowth to a Lauren prince who thought spinal cords were decorative. No, something better. A field symposium on regenerative anomalies. They want a demonstration. Azara stared at him. I'm not a science experiment. Of course not. You're a living miracle who happens to walk dramatically now. You're dangerously close to getting tossed again. Only mildly electrocuted. And I've upgraded my coat. He activated the hologram, revealing a slow-rotating image of a space station shaped like a spiraled nautilus shell, the Cauldron, one of the most advanced research hubs in this arm of the galaxy. The symposium would be held across its 3 rotating labs, each with customized gravity, atmospheric control, and, according to the invite, snack drones. Azara raised an eyebrow. What kind of demonstration? They want to scan your neuromuscular system mid-motion while you navigate a mobility gauntlet. That sounds made up. It is. I may have suggested it. You volunteered me for an intergalactic obstacle course. Professionally. She sighed. Is there a prize? There's a medal. I want a medal shaped like a sarcastic thumbs up. 2 days later, they arrived at the Cauldron. The docking bay smelled faintly of ozone and something that might have once been cheese. Azara walked confidently down the ramp, her cane tucked under one arm and her hair tied back to avoid tangling with the air scrubbers. The welcome committee was small, a floating orb named Thrum, two tall insectoid researchers with lab coats stitched to their wings, and a bureaucrat whose name tag read MERN, Protocol Enforcer, no exceptions. Myrn attempted to shake Elias's hand and accidentally triggered his sleeve's microdeflector. Elias ricocheted into a vending unit and emerged with a snack cube stuck to his forehead. Azara tried not to laugh. She failed. They were escorted to Lab Ring C, where the obstacle course awaited. It was ambitious. Floating platforms, moving ramps, shifting grav fields. At the far end, a large panel glowed red with the words Mobility Initiative Challenge, Beginner Mode. Below that, in smaller text, warning, beginner mode is still statistically dangerous. Azara rolled her shoulders. This is ridiculous. You're going to crush it. I'll crush something, all right. She stepped into the start zone. A chorus of data drones activated, fluttering around her with scanners and sensors that blinked excitedly at her presence. A countdown began. 3. Elias shouted. Remember, don't step where it glows orange. Why? Pretty sure it flips. Of course it does. 2. Also, if the floor hums, that's the graph shift. How comforting. 1. Also, avoid the cube with legs. The what now? A siren blared. The course activated. Azara leapt forward instinctively, her cane catching a stabilizer as she launched across the first platform. It wobbled. She didn't. Her legs held. A series of columns spun ahead. She ducked, twisted, and sprinted, the floor beneath her pulsing with low-frequency feedback. The drone circled, tracking everything. She hit the second zone, low gravity. Her leap carried her too far. She landed sideways, rolled, and bounced into a safety wall, laughing breathlessly. Still alive, she called out. Keep going. Elias shouted, pointing to the next hazard. The cube's awake. She turned just in time to see a box-shaped automaton unfold 6 legs and begin skittering toward her like a caffeinated crab. She sidestepped, kicked it in what she hoped was its face, and sent it tumbling off the course. Applause erupted from the observation window. Several scientists high-fived. One was crying into a data pad. Azara cleared the final platform with a spinning hop and slid into the end zone with a triumphant grin. The panel flashed challenge complete, mobility status, exceptional. Then it added, cube subdued, bonus points awarded. Elias caught up to her with a bottle of hydration mist and an expression that hovered between amazement and smug satisfaction. You were incredible, he said. I may never walk again. That's the spirit. They returned to the lounge for debriefing, where the symposium leaders bombarded them with questions, scans, and requests for collaboration. Azara endured it all with the patience of someone who had once been paralyzed and now had enough core strength to vault an angry cube. That evening, as they floated above the glass observation deck, watching comets drift past the station, Elias handed her a small case. For you. She opened it. Inside was a metal shaped like a sarcastic thumbs up. I bribed a 3D printer, he said. With gum. She laughed, harder than she had in weeks. You're still the weirdest person I've ever met, she said. I try. She looked at him for a long moment, then leaned in, resting her head against his shoulder. Thanks for the walk. He didn't reply immediately, just reached over and took her hand. It was warm, steady. You did the walking, he finally said. She nodded. But you made me want to try. The stars outside shifted, their light flickering through the curved glass. In that moment, with gravity humming low and the universe quietly spinning around them, neither of them needed to say anything more. The garden was still a mess from Elias's last harmless experiment, which had involved a prototype healing mist, an amplifier coil, and an ill-timed sneeze. Several shrubs had grown 6 feet overnight. One of them was now sentient and sulking. Azara avoided it on her morning walk. She didn't need the cane anymore. It rested in the corner of her quarters like a retired veteran, its taser feature still technically operational, something Elias learned the hard way when he tried to repurpose it into a universal remote. Azara walked because she could, not because she had to prove anything, not because someone was scanning her spine or measuring her stride. She walked for the sound of her own feet, the quiet pressure of the floor beneath her, the gentle ache that reminded her of distance covered. Elias showed up late, as usual, hair defying logic, and holding a small container filled with what he swore were muffins. They jiggled suspiciously. "I've modified the baking replicator," he said. "Now it uses quantum flavor layering. One bite contains the essence of 3 breakfasts. Is one of them edible?" "Statistically." He handed her one. She poked it with a fork. It hummed. They sat near the edge of the courtyard, watching a training drone chase sparrows away from the energy fields. The sparrows had adapted, flying upside down to confuse the drone sensors. Elias rooted for the birds. Azara bet on the drone. They split the winnings, which turned out to be 2 more muffins and a celebratory tea made of electrically charged mint. "I got an offer," Elias said casually, as if he hadn't been rehearsing it in his head all week. Azara didn't look at him. "Another symposium?" "Better. The Intergalactic Healing Initiative wants me to lead a mobile research fleet. Deep space, experimental medicine, alien biology so obscure it might not even be legal to pronounce." She took a sip of tea. "Sounds dangerous." "Could be. Sounds like you." He waited. She didn't speak. He kept waiting. Finally she said, "How long would you be gone?" "Years." She nodded. "You're going." He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again because he was Elias and couldn't let dramatic pauses sit too long. "I don't want to leave you." She smiled. "You never stayed because of obligation. Don't turn into someone who leaves out of guilt. Come with me." She blinked. "What?" "You heard me. I can't just drop everything and fly off into space." "Why not? You're not tied down. You're not broken. You're not hiding anymore. You're Azara of Varela, destroyer of cubes, dancer of orbital galas, terrifying commander of sarcastic chairs." She looked at him. "What would I even do on a medical fleet?" "Live. Help. Mock me while I mispronounce alien organs." "You make a compelling case. I also brought pie." "That's cheating." He pulled out a 3rd container. She squinted at it. "This one better not glow." "It only glows when nervous." They sat in silence, eating questionable pie and watching the sky darken as the rings of Lixer shimmered into view. Later, she stood in the hall of the Royal Archives alone, staring at the portrait of her younger self in full flight armor. It felt like another person. She didn't pity that version of herself anymore. She didn't envy her either. She'd fought, flown, fallen. But the real journey had started in a chair, with a cinnamon roll, and an idiot who kept blowing up houseplants. She submitted her resignation that afternoon. The Empress raised an eyebrow and asked if it involved Elias. Azara confirmed it did. The Empress sighed, handed her a ceremonial star badge, and told her to at least keep the diplomatic channels open. Azara promised to send postcards. The ship was smaller than she expected. Sleek, fast, and full of experimental equipment that probably violated 3 treaties and at least 1 culinary code. Elias showed her the co-captain's quarters, which he'd decorated with holographic fish and a rug made from recycled lab coats. "Homie," she said, "I aim for mildly chaotic comfort." The launch was quiet. No fanfare. Just the ship lifting gently from the Elixir platform, sliding past the upper domes, and vanishing into the star-splashed void. Azara stood at the viewport, legs steady, heart louder than the engines. Elias came up beside her, holding 2 cups of tea, one normal, one with the faint crackle of static. She took the static one. He looked surprised. "You're changing." She grinned. "I was overdue." They flew for weeks, visited systems that existed between political maps, helped a colony whose children couldn't breathe standard atmospheres, restored a singer's voice with frequency-aligned nerve tuning, and accidentally gave a planetary governor glowing eyebrows. Elias blamed the replicator. Azara didn't believe him. At night, they sat under domes of artificial starlight, talking about nothing and everything. Sometimes they didn't talk at all. Sometimes they argued about cereal. Once, she tackled him during a zero-grav malfunction, and they spent 2 hours orbiting the kitchen table. Somewhere in the neutral zones of the Mirax cluster, he kissed her. She kissed him back. It wasn't dramatic. No swelling music. Just contact, quiet, soft. Like breath returning. Like walking after 10 years of stillness. Azara woke the next day with his arm draped over her and a message from the Varellan Council requesting her opinion on an interspecies aid program. She replied with one word. Approved. Elias peeked at the screen. Did you just draft galactic policy in one word? I'm efficient. He buried his face in the pillow. You're terrifying. I know. They flew on. New missions. New mistakes. New reasons to keep moving. Azara stood on her own, walked on her own, flew in ways she'd never imagined. Not with wings, but with will. Not alone, but not dependent. She had healed, not perfectly, not completely, but truly. And in the great quiet between stars, she smiled. Because this time, she was walking toward something. Not away. The end.